and welcome to our session on how to do a webinar. My name is John Johnston. I'm the moderator for this session. I'm the immediate past council chair for Multiple District A in Ontario, and I'm here to help you get as much information from Chris as possible and work the crowd with you, so if you have questions. If you have to use the washrooms, there's washrooms in either direction. There's water outside also if you haven't brought anything in. If you are not feeling well, please let us know. We have people that can help you if that is the case. Okay. I will be passing around the paw so that you can sign, get into it. I noticed a few people already got ahead of that, so please don't do it again. Because they take the numbers from the number of people that get this information on. Okay, so enough for me. I'd like to introduce to you past District Governor Chris Lewis. He joined Lions in the Great Rivers Club back in 1999. He has served as the district governor for A12 and our multiple district A in 2013-14. As the governor, he created a Lions Day of service where clubs throughout the district of A12 conduct meaningful service activities all on the same day. 42 or 46 clubs participated in that project at that time. The Day of Service is now expanded beyond District A12 to districts across North America and around the world. So he's a leader. Throughout his Lions career, he has been an active member of both the global leadership team and the global membership team at the multiple district level. He currently serves as the global membership team area leader responsible for Eastern Canada and Northern Maine. Eastern Canada includes Ontario, so it's a large part of our country. His service recognitions include Lion of the Year, the Helen Keller Fellowship, and he is a Progressive Judge Brian Stevenson Fellow and a Progressive Melvin Jones Fellow. In addition, Chris has participated in 4 international President's Certificates of Appreciation and an International President's Leadership Medal. Lions, will you please welcome Lion Chris Lewis.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Being from Canada, we love beer, so we're going to wrap this up in about 10-15 minutes because we're getting real close to happy hour. I hope you're not disappointed.
I thought you'd just drag out the cooler.
Pardon me?
I thought you'd just drag out the cooler.
Yeah, well, we could have brought our own. So, who has conducted a webinar before? A few hands. Who have participated in webinars before? Right, almost every hand, right? They're a little bit different, I think, than conducting face-to-face training like this. That's what we're going to talk about is some of the differences between face-to-face or in-classroom training and some of the things we have to do a little bit differently in order to conduct a webinar effectively. We're really fortunate this year. I did this session last year, but we didn't have any Wi-Fi in the room. So this year we have Wi-Fi, so we're actually pretty excited. We're going to be able to log in and create and schedule a webinar, so you'll be able to see some of the interface that you would see when you put on a webinar for the very first time. So that's a pretty exciting thing. We'll have lots of time for questions, lots of time for interaction, as long as we fit into that 15-minute time frame I have to get the back and forth stuff, because I do have ears on ice. So. We're also going to discuss, I think, some of the benefits that we have to doing a webinar. Because there's lots of benefits, and we really want to talk about how you and your districts and your multiple districts can use webinars more effectively in order to engage and train and develop the people in your districts and multiples. We're really going to share some strategies to make your webinars even a little bit better. We won't be able to go really deep into that, but we'll touch the surface. We might get some ideas from you as well. Those of you who had the opportunity to attend the Faculty Development Excellence Series, which is an extension that comes on after Faculty Development Institutes, do have an opportunity to learn slide design and so on that can make it a little bit better when you create webinars. So if you have an opportunity to attend that session, I really would encourage it. So, obviously a big difference between webinars and traditional training is the need for a reliable, high-speed internet connection. In Mobile District A, where I'm from, Ontario, the northern part of our multiple is a lot of soup cans and string internet. We really struggle with high-speed internet, but that's some of the things you're going to need to do in effective webinars. You're going to need a good, effective internet connection. I'm not sure what the internet is like here in Omaha, but there are probably spots where it's less than stellar, I would think. But yeah, you definitely have to have a pretty decent internet connection and just decent speed. You're going to be uploading some graphics and some voice and so on while you're conducting the webinar, and you really need to have one that's pretty decent speed. You wouldn't be able to do it on one of those old dial-up connections that just wouldn't be very effective at all.
As you learned.
Some webinar hosts will allow you to phone in and use your home phone to connect and work with the webinar, and that's always a good way to do it as well. And in fact, I think that's a preferred way to communicate on a webinar is by telephone, because the connection is much, much better. Traditional training involves driving to a central location and then receiving training, much like many of you did here. You flew or you drove, came in here for training, received training, then you went back home. But webinars can be done in the comfort of your own home or on your own computer, which is excellent. And you can use a laptop computer, a tablet, an iPhone will be very effective as well for doing a webinar. Anything that you can use, you can conduct a webinar at your convenience in many ways. So weather and road conditions aren't a problem. Because last time I looked, it wasn't snowing in my living room, was it? But it could be on a night when you're going through a district training or a multiple training. One thing I encourage, though, is sometimes it's easy to bring webinar participants into one central location, to a Lions Hall or a den, and then they can participate all as one group. So you can really expand, still have some of the benefits of face-to-face training and the social aspects we have with webinars, but all in one central location. And that can help if you're having struggles with some internet challenges where some people have slow internet speed, but maybe the Lions Hall has good internet. I think one of the big benefits of using a webinar versus traditional training is cost. How many people do you think we have in here? Maybe 100? 100 people in the room? 120 people in the room? And each of you spent $255 or something to come here, plus airfare and all that other stuff, right? That's pretty expensive. But a webinar could go out to hundreds and hundreds of people that at no cost to them. So there's a huge, huge cost benefit to conducting webinars versus face-to-face training. Time, what about time savings? Do you think there's some big time savings from doing a webinar instead of bringing people all in together and so on? Yeah, I think there is. And one of the really cool things about webinars is they're very repeatable. Once you've developed the content and you've made a recording of the webinar, you can now share that recording with all sorts of other people. That's something that doesn't normally happen in a traditional face-to-face session, other than the fact that they're recording this one right now, right? But for the most part, when you do training, you have to do it again next week and again the week after, and you're doing it across your district. So it's very repeatable and very, very beneficial. But I'm not going to say that you should always do a webinar, because I think there's real benefits to interacting as a group and the social aspects, because I think we're social creatures. There's still great opportunities to talk to people face to face and interact. But webinars are a great option to use in your training. But I think the number one benefit to doing a webinar versus a face-to-face training is that pants are not required. Normally, I think you would probably have an issue if I took my pants off right now. Although I'm comfortable in my body, I don't know if you are. But pants are not required if you're doing a webinar. I've done webinars without pants on. However, I would recommend that you grab a piece of electrical tape and cover up your camera and so forth. So let's talk about some different providers for webinars. There's a company called Uvu, free, for up to, I think it's about 20 participants or thereabouts. We have Genesis for Intercall, a lot of businesses use that. Adobe Connect is another webinar provider. Even Skype. Skype can be used in many ways as a webinar. You know, you may do it free with 20 or 24 people, I think. But then beyond that, you have to pay. But it's a possibility. You can do something very similar to a webinar, online training using Skype. But the one we're going to be talking about today is Citrix GoToMeeting. And it's probably one of the more popular packages. Yeah, you got to pay for it. But many multiples or districts sometimes use that as part of their training budget. So there's two parts of the GoToMeeting. There's GoToMeeting and the GoToWebinar function. And they're both slightly different, but they're also very much the same. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the differences of whether you want to conduct your training using a GoToMeeting or a GoToWebinar. So GoToMeetings are a little bit smaller. They're for less than 25 participants, which might work great if you're just training maybe your district cabinet. Might be effective to use GoToMeeting. You don't have to pre-register to put on a GoToMeeting. You can start the meeting right away and say, everyone's all coming in, we're doing the meeting right now. And you can also use your phone to dial in and participate and so forth. So GoToMeeting, small trainings would be fine. But GoToWebinar, depending on the package you buy, you can have up to 5,000 people in it. I don't know, Josh, how big is LCI's package for it? 500. So you can get a pretty large group of people attending on a GoToWebinar, more so than you could at a district or a GoToMeeting. GoToWebinars generally you have to pre-register, meaning that you will set up the webinar. We're going to show that in a couple of minutes. And the participants who are going to participate in the webinar have to pre-register to attend, and they'll get a link, and they'll log in at the time of your webinar With GoToWebinar, you generally have to use a computer or a tablet. There are some options where you can log in by telephone and listen to the webinar, but it's generally speaking, you want to log in with a computer, your iPad, your phone, that kind of thing. So GoToWebinar is what we're going to be talking about today. So there are three roles when you're conducting a webinar. Those three are the organizer, the role of a panelist, and the role of an attendee. Now, many of you said that you've participated in webinars before, but you would have all been attendees. So we're not going to talk a lot about attendees because you've been there. You know what that's all about. So the role of the organizer, they're responsible for scheduling the webinar. So they're the ones that decide when the webinar is going to be held, what date, the time, some of the background stuff. We're going to show you how to organize and set up a webinar in just a couple minutes. The organizer also invites the attendees. So they'll get a link to the webinar and they'll email that out or they'll share it in whatever way that you want to share that, through Facebook, through social media, that kind of thing. And then obviously the organizer at the time of the webinar pushes the start button and lets her rip. So those are the three main roles of the organizer. The next main position during a webinar is the role of the panelist. And the panelists would be people who are speaking during the webinar and presenting some of the content. The organizer can do that too as well. But the panelists, they have the opportunity to share their screen. So when the panelist is speaking, they can show their screen. So you can have multiple panelists in different places, and they can flip their screens back and forth, so you can see what's on my screen, you can see what's on someone else's screen who's presenting somewhere else. So panelists are probably the key people you'll be using when you put on a webinar. So panelists can speak during the webinar, whereas attendees, we'll see that in a second, will be muted initially, so they can't speak until they get unmuted to speak. So, for pretty obvious reasons, especially if you have 5,000 people or 500 people on a webinar, it would get crazy real quick. And the panelists can answer questions. We're going to show you the question and answer pane that you'll see as a webinar organizer so you'll be able to see the questions as they appear, and the panelists can answer those questions. Then finally, the attendee, and you've all been attendees, I think. So you can obviously sit there and watch the webinar. You can participate in the webinar, raising your hand, asking questions, interacting, answering polls, and of course asking questions through the Q&A pane. Those are the three main roles during a webinar. So, who would like to start? So we're going to go to the GoToMeeting website. We're going to schedule a webinar that's going to happen in just a couple of minutes. So the website you would go to is GoToMeeting.com. Now in our multiple district, we have a GoToMeeting account that we purchase as part of our global leadership team and global membership team budget, and we share that with all the sub-districts in our multiple. And from a cost-wise, it's about $1,000 or so Canadian per year. So for you Americans, it'd be about 150 bucks. Which seems like a fair amount of money, $1,000 a year, but think of how much money is saved by doing it. Our Council of Governors might have a half dozen different online meetings throughout the year in between our regular council meetings, so that's a huge money savings from people driving all over the place. When we log in a second, you'll see we have lots of Lions Quest committee meetings going on that are already booked and so forth. So those are all things that are saving people from driving all over the province of Ontario to come into a central location for some of the training and meetings. So we think $1,000 is a pretty good deal. And I would encourage you, when you go back to your districts and multiples, look at opportunities to perhaps consider that when you budget for GLT and GOT in your districts, because it is a pretty big benefit. Sign in. And we're just going to go to webinar. So on the screen, a little bit bigger. So on the screen, you'll see all the webinars that are upcoming. So we have one coming up on September 27th for our Canadian Lions Quest chairs. And it's scheduled for 7 p.m. till 8:30 Eastern Time. And we have a bunch of Lions Quest things on the go coming up. So this is where you'll see all the upcoming webinars over the next 3 or 4 months and so forth. But we're going to create one. So that will just be over here at the left. We'll just schedule a webinar. If you've already done webinars in the past, you have an opportunity to just copy an old one and just change a few of the settings, which makes it nice and quick to set up. So you just drop down and choose a webinar, and you can see all sorts of different webinars that we've done. And as you can see, there's 20 or 30 in the history right now that have been saved. So there's definitely a cost savings to using this. We're just going to take it all in here, so we're just going to call it Forum Webinar. And then we can put any description you want in. And the description is kind of nice because you'll see this information when you first log in to register for the webinar. So you want to have a decent description. So something like a discussion of how to use GoToMeeting. The next option you have is whether you want this webinar to be once. Sometimes you might have a webinar series, which might be part of it one week, maybe next week a second part of it, or a third week, and you can do that here. Or you might have a webinar that you're doing the same webinar 2 or 3 times at different times so that different people can attend it. LCI does that a lot with their webinars. They'll have one perhaps in the morning and one in the evening because of time zones all across the world, so they quite often do that. And then we're going to have a start date. Today is Friday. What time is it about? 10 to 4?
Yep.
So, so let's make that for about 4 p.m. We're not going to have a 4-hour webinar because one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit is try to keep your webinars down to about an hour at most, because that's about all the butts can take. In a face-to-face meeting, you might be able to go a little bit longer for training sessions, an hour and a half maybe before you take a break, because you're moving around and doing all sorts of other things. But when you're sitting in front of a computer for an hour is about all you want to do. So we'll make it about an hour. Time zone is going to be pretty important, especially if you're sharing your webinar with people all over the place. Because you want it to show up in their calendar effectively, so you want to make sure you put the right time zone in. So we're not Eastern, we're Central here, right?
That's correct.
And then webinar, we have options for English. We have Canadian English, so we got lots of U's and A's in there. We don't have an option for Texan, I don't think. So something like you want to do, I would think in most cases it would probably be English. And then just click schedule. And we have to sign in again. Try it again. Forum, description. Central. There we go. So now our webinar is all set up. So you can now see this is the webinar, and this is where you would share that information. So if you want to share it, you would just simply click share, and you can copy a registration link, you can post it to your Facebook account, you can do all sorts of things. Because the whole idea now with webinar is you want to get lots of people to attend. It might be a targeted webinar just for specific people, like your cabinet officers or whatever. But in many cases, you want all sorts of people to attend, because the more people that attend, the more interaction you'll get and the more learning and sharing that you'll have. So you just copy that, post it in whatever way you want to do. If you just want to copy it, you can just copy it, and then you can then stick it into any email you want, just by pasting it right in. Or you can just post it to Facebook, and I'm not logged in, so you probably won't be able to see that. So let's look at some other settings that we can do here. Click the function that says Add Organizer Details. If you click that, it'll take the webinar you've just created and make sure it's put into your calendar so you don't forget about it. Because I think it'd be pretty embarrassing to have a webinar scheduled and the guy doesn't show up that's running it. So we'll do that. In this webinar, the participants can use their telephone using a Canadian long-distance number. And each of the people, organizer, panelists, or attendees, have an access code. And they'll need that access code when they first log in to participate in the webinar. And you want organizers and panelists to have different access codes because they have different levels of stuff they can do. They can come on and they can talk right away using that access code to help you plan and start off your meeting, but the attendees will all be muted when they come in. The branding and themes, this allows you to, when you register for a webinar as a participant, you'll see a fairly blank screen and gloss screen. It'll be white, it'll have a little bit of text, it'll say, here's your webinar, very kind of boring. But you can edit this and upload graphics and so forth to make it a little bit more exciting when they register and when they log in for the first time. In the organizer section, this is where you can add extra organizers to your meeting, which is always a good idea in case something ever happens where you're having trouble logging in. If you have your backup person who can then log in and get the meeting started while you're kind of messing around with your technical issues, it's always a good idea to have your organizer set. And same with the panelists. So if I'm having 2 or 3 people that are presenting in part of it, I can set them all up here and they'll get a special email with their access code already sent to them. And then this is the section where you can invite your attendees. You can just copy this link. You can email an invitation and it'll get emailed to you. You can just forward it out to whoever you want to do. Now our MDA account has 1,000 people that can participate in a webinar. And I've done webinars that have had 150, 200 people. We share coast to coast. So you probably don't want much more than 200. It gets kind of a little bit unwieldy at times when it gets that big. It's especially for your first one. And then you have some options to have whether the people that register to attend the webinar have an opportunity to be tracked, and you'll get notifications that they've signed up and registered. Here you get confirmation emails, and I always recommend that you get reminder emails sent to everybody, a day or a little bit in advance of each webinar, and you can edit the features on that. Should be able to edit the features on that. Should be able to edit the features on that.
Cannot be changed. It said something about cannot be changed.
Yeah, they all have little hiccups. So. Anyway, you can get a reminder email sent out because a lot of times people register for a webinar sometimes 2 or 3 weeks or a month in advance, and they'll forget about it. They might not have put it in their calendar or their planner, and all of a sudden you might have 200 people register for the webinar and 30 show up. And generally, a good rule of thumb for a webinar is about 25 to 35% turnout from the people registered is a pretty good response rate actually to show up and attend. And there's no recordings yet, which we haven't done. This section down here talks about handouts, polls, and surveys. So you can now upload into GoToMeeting, you can upload some of the handouts for your meeting so that those handouts can be uploaded there, and the attendees, when they log in, they'll be able to download those handouts as they see fit. It's a great way to make sure you get them. You can also upload handouts and different things throughout the meeting, throughout the GoToMeeting. You don't want to have them all up at the same time, because the person might just download them and then disappear and not participate. Polls are a great way to engage and interact with your attendees by having different questions that you're asking and different things they can do to get some information from them. Because here, I can ask a question to the group. People can raise their hands, I can walk around, John will take the mic out and get some feedback. In a webinar, it's a little bit harder to engage your people because there's no personal contact. So having polls or surveys are also good. The survey is generally completed at the end of your webinar, and it's the same sort of survey you would have in most face-to-face training. How did you like the webinar? What could you do better? And you can set up those survey questions very simply, and those will get posted to the person when they exit the webinar. So those are the basics of setting up a webinar. So let's see what your screen would look like once you start the webinar. So a couple things I would recommend when you hold your first webinar is there's a button that says practice and a button that says start. Practice is a good thing, just so you can get a feel for how the display works. It's a little bit different than what you'd see as a participant, so it's a good idea to practice it. Another thing I recommend too is when you do your first webinar, log in a good half hour in advance to make sure that all your organizers and panelists are all ready to go, their audio's working great, and all that stuff. So we don't want to have any little hiccups when we get into the webinar. You don't want to have a webinar starting at 2 p.m. and you don't get started until almost 2:30 because it's not going very well. So you want to have it all set up pretty effectively. So 20 minutes, half an hour, easy is better. I'd rather sit there, but don't cancel. And be really prepared for the webinar rather than trying to rush right in there at the last couple minutes and so on. And for those of us who have done webinars, have we ever had any screw-ups like that? Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So to get there 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and so on. So let's click the practice button. So now it may download a little bit of information about it first when you're going to launch it. Second here. So this is going to be a little bit similar. We're just going to continue the practice right now. So this is going to be pretty similar to what you would normally see. This would be pretty similar to what you would see if you were a participant in a webinar. You would have a panel very similar to this. Some options you have. On the Options tab, you can check off whether the people that are attending can see everyone else that's on the webinar. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Sometimes you don't want everyone to know who's necessarily on the call. Because maybe people won't interact quite as much or share sometimes as much if they see somebody on there that they don't, and they might have maybe a personal issue with, so you might want to maybe hide that. But in most cases, you would want to, maybe have the attendee list visible. You can also have, can attendees raise hands? Can they ask questions and those sorts of things? You simply check those off, or whatever you want to do. The Audience View tab, if you open that little plus sign here, that little tiny square there is roughly what the attendees would see. So it's a little square. So when you go through a slide, you can actually kind of, just a very quick view as to what they're seeing on your screen, just to make sure that the screen sharing. If I want to show my screen as a presenter, I can show my screen, but there's some options. There's screen or there's screen clean. So the screen clean is probably the one I would use, because it's not going to show all the taskbar and all the other junk that's all happening there. All you'll see is the screen. You've now seen that audience view. That's roughly what you would, what the participants would now see. If you want to turn your webcam on, you can share the webcam right here. As long as you've got pants on.
Then you have to.
So I'm going to appear there, and I'd be able to see, everyone will be able to see what I'm seeing, but we'll turn that little baby off. Audio, this is where you can determine whether you're going to use your mic or your telephone and so on. But a lot of that's very similar to what you would have had if you were a participant before. The dashboard, this just tells you how many people are logged in and that kind of thing. So you'll have your list of attendees, will all be sorted here. And staff members, which would consist of all your organizers, panelists, that kind of thing. Any polls that you created will already be set here. You can launch those polls at the right time. And then a list of all the questions that people are asking. So as questions are asked, they'll appear in this little pane, and then you can just simply click on them and answer. Which leads me to a great little discussion about, don't do a webinar alone. Because you need helpers. You need helpers. There's lots of stuff going on a webinar. You need, first off, you might want 2 or 3 presenters so they're not talking for an hour. That's one big benefit. But you need a helper who can kind of manage some of those questions as they're coming in while you're delivering content. So always have 1 or 2 people to sort of manage the back of the house stuff. When I do a webinar, I always try to involve our district internet technology person. So he kind of sits there and he can really help, because some of the participants are struggling maybe logging in the first time, or their audio's not working. So he can connect directly with that one person and help them out and configure something on their computer for them so they can participate better. So having your IT guy on is great if you have that opportunity. So have some helpers. This is your handouts page. This is where your handouts appear. If you want to add a file during the webinar, you can simply choose a file from your computer and upload it there, and then people can download it. And then the chat box, which you would see if you were a participant on the webinar. So, do you have any questions at all about the organizer interface? It's not that much different than you would see from a participant, is it? It's pretty similar. So let's just end the webinar for now. So that's the basics of yeah.
You showed the chat box.
Yeah.
Is that how you communicate with each other?
Yeah, so with the chat box, participants can log in and they go to the chat box and they can send messages to the presenters, to any of the staff members, to any of the other participants, to the whole group if you want. Sometimes you get the odd person there who's chatting the whole time and leave alone. But yeah, it's a way just to interact and so on. And that's a great tool to use if you're struggling with audio or so on, is encourage your participants to say, hey, if you're having any trouble or questions, drop them in the chat box, and then your helper can lead through it while you're carrying on. Because if people are coming to a webinar and it's supposed to run from 3 to 4, they don't want it to run 3 till 5 because, you know, the presenter's always stopping to answer all that other garbage, right? So it's kind of nice to have someone else looking after that, and then it keeps the whole webinar on topic. Because those are things that it's a little harder on a webinar for people to know what's going on, right? Here, if I were having technical issues here, you would all know about it. You would all be here, you would all recognize that there's a technical issue, and if it took 2 or 3 minutes to resolve, you'd probably be pretty cool with it. But on a webinar, you might not know that the thing is failing miserably and that the organizer, you know, his internet connection's slow and it's not working right, and you might have all sorts of, you might not get that feeling. So having someone else sort of managing those questions and conflicts and stuff like that can make the whole thing go a little better. So.
Chris?
Yeah.
If you have a question, please look for the mic because they're recording this, and it's easier to record it when you're on the mic, okay?
So let's talk a little bit about developing your content, because developing the content is a little bit different than you would normally have during a face-to-face training. First thing I think is you should really want to make a connection. Here, in this room, you know who John is, and you know who I am, and you know the people around you, you see them and so on, but you wouldn't really get that in a webinar necessarily, would you? So for example, if this were a slide you were presenting on a webinar, and this is because I was in Grand Rapids last year, in City, USA, and you know, this slide, does it meet a lot of the things that you would be trained on if you were developing an effective PowerPoint slide? Yeah, okay, it's clear, not a lot of words, you know, it's you know, a nice background, whatever. It would be the basics that you would have for doing effective training. But on a webinar, you might have to go an extra little step to make it a little more recognizable and engaging to your people. You might need to do something like that. Because no one knows who your presenter is, and you maybe want to see a picture of the person, you may want to see some of those things, so the next time you run into that person face to face, you'll recognize them and see it. So a slight change to it, and of course now you just got a punchy bald guy up here, so that's fine. But yeah, so you might want to change your content slightly if you're taking a presentation that you would normally do face to face. You might want to do something like that and add that into your presentation to make it a little bit more engaging. We already talked about making sure your webinars are no more than about 60 minutes, because that's about all you can take. I would recommend that if you're using a couple of trainers, that they maybe do 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes max, one presenter, and then maybe swap off to someone else, you know, maybe someone else can do some questions or some polls, and then maybe come back to someone different, just to hear different voices. It's hard enough doing a presentation face-to-face where you only have one presenter and one voice, because you tend to tone it out after 40, 45 minutes. Who has participated in a webinar before where it was just one person droning on for hours and hours and hours? Exactly. So it's kind of nice to be able to interact a little bit and break that up so it's a little more engaging. Something you want to avoid too is animation. You want to simplify some of the slides. Because everything you're doing is all going back and forth on the internet. There are a lot of people to be connecting and it could kind of slow down. So you want to kind of simplify your slides a little bit. Not a lot of graphics, not a lot of movement. You can put some video on it, but sometimes it'll be chunky and so you might want to avoid some of that stuff and just really simplify the slides so that it's just very direct and very simple to make it easier for the people on the other end, because you might have 100 people on your webinar and they all have different internet speeds and they might struggle a little bit with the fancy stuff. So really try to keep some of that stuff down a little bit more. Delivering a webinar, we've touched on a few of these things so far, but audio. If you're conducting a webinar, you really kind of want to make sure that the audio on your computer is top notch. So you probably don't want to use the microphone and speakers and stuff that are just built into your $350 laptop. Okay? You probably want to buy a $30, $40, $50 even set of headphones will be dramatically better with the microphone, maybe some noise canceling would be great. If you have an option for your headphones, make sure they're USB headphones instead of the old analog ones. But I guess Apple doesn't really care about those analog ones anymore, right?
Right.
They're rid of all those. But anyway, but the USB ones tend to have less interference. So they tend to work better and clearer. And going to your Staples or whatever and spending 40 or 50 bucks will make a dramatic difference on how your webinars are. You also might be interested in, perhaps trying using your home phone to do the audio, because your home phone connections generally are much, much better than you would have from anything going back and forth on the internet. So audio, I think, is pretty important. We already talked about multiple presenters, trying to use more and more people to do some of the presentations so you don't bore everybody. Really using a moderator, someone who can introduce the presenter at the beginning, much like you would do in face-to-face training. And then that moderator can answer some of those questions and deal with some of that stuff behind the scenes for you, so that when you're presenting, you can focus your time and energy on the presentation. And engaging. It's a little bit harder on a webinar to engage, don't you think? Let's ask you, what sort of things could you do if you were conducting a webinar to keep the participants involved and listening and active, and what sort of things could you do if you conducted a webinar differently than you may do here? John's coming right over there in the back.
Ask questions.
Ask questions, yeah. Yeah, so instead of just droning on for 45 minutes or an hour lecturing, but if you break it up by asking some questions and saying, so does anyone know what do you do in your district about vision screening, and asking those questions, and then getting people to put their answers in the chat box or whatever, and then having the moderator read some of those out is a great way to engage and keep people active and involved. Yeah, great.
Do a survey.
Surveys, yeah, polling questions where you're asking. So that's a great thing to do even at the start of a webinar, is really finding out what type of people are on the webinar. So how many district governors do we have? How many zone chairs? How many presidents? Because if you know that at the beginning of the meeting, your people now know who they're sharing and collaborating with. You might change some of your content as you go based on the type of audience that you have. So, and those are things that you might be able to figure out in a classroom, because you'll look in and you'll see all the rectangular badges, or you'll see all the circles or whatever, right? So you might be able to gauge the audience you have just by the people that are in the room. You might not see that as much on a webinar. Any other ways you can engage a person?
You could have handouts.
Yeah. And I really like having the handouts sort of dropped in there throughout it, rather than having them all there at the beginning for everyone to grab. Because you're right, dropping your handout and say, hey, you'll notice there's a handout in your handout pane, then they can go click them, download them, get them all there. You might maybe want one there at the beginning, which is something that they need to maybe refer to. You can also share some of those in advance to the people once they've registered. You'll now know everybody that's there, or everyone who pre-registered attend, you can send them out information and connect with them before your webinar. And that's a great way to engage people too.
But just because you're on a webinar doesn't mean you can't still pick on somebody. If you have their list of who the participants are, the attendees, and maybe like that they are EG or they're this or PID or whatever, then you can ask, them, I see you're on here, do you have anything to add or a comment? That kind of thing.
And that's a great point. Because you get the registration list at the, throughout the entire registration process, you'll know who's all on there. And you'll be able to check and say, hey, John's on here, so I'll be able to use John on this. And then I always recommend that if you're on there about half an hour before, people are usually logging in sometimes to participate that far in advance sometimes, right? So they'll be logged in, so you'll now know who's already shown up. So that then you'll be able to point them out and so on, and you'll be able to use them. That's great, knowing who's on the. Any other ways we can engage? Okay.
Very good, Chris. But anyways, one of the suggestions would be that when you set up the webinar at the beginning, as people sign in, you have a message that says welcome, and then ask them then to put in the questions box who they are and where they come from. Those two bits of information will help the moderator or whoever to more improve the communication, so you can recognize people individually if you see something wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, but when you log in, by default, as a participant, you'll show up as Chris Lewis or whatever you've configured. But if you go into your attendee pane, your control panel at the side, you can now change your name on there. And so a good best bet would be to say, hey, everybody, you just log in and change your name to past council chair, district governor, zone chair. Then you can quickly see it in the attendee list in their title right there. One in the back there. Oh, Tim's right there.
The interplay between multiple presenters is also important too.
Yep.
So when you're dealing with another past district governor on the thing, chat with them back and forth, and that engages people as well.
Yeah,
they can tell first-person stories. My experience was this. So
even though webinars tend to be fairly structured, you generally have a script you need to stick to, and you have to stick to a script when you do a webinar because you're on a very tight time schedule, and you can't read the audience quite the same as you would normally do. So you have to have generally a script, but you have to have flexibility in that script for some banter and some back and forth, and be able to adapt the training to suit the needs of the people on the call.
This is an example, but I have a question. Is there possible to set up discussion groups? Like you would pre-establish that, let's say you have 30 people participating, you pre-establish that each in groups of 6, so you'd have 5 groups. So when you give a presentation, you talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and then you would break as a moderator and say, okay, now go back to your discussion groups, speak amongst yourselves, and we'll come back. Do you have capabilities?
I don't think that's capability of GoToWebinar, but there's another level beyond that, which is GoToTraining, which is designed for a lot of those sort of things. And I think discussion groups and small group work is part of the GoToTraining module for that. That's intended for like massive trainings that you would do on a corporate side. But it's a great feature, I think.
As a part of your registration process, can you ask for offices held?
Yes, you can actually edit the registration screen and add other information like district or email address and all those things. I think there's a few default ones. They always ask you for your first name, last name, and email address, I believe. But you can add other things in, and that's helpful because you'll be able to download these reports after the webinar, which gives you a list of who showed up and where they were from, what questions they answered, what poll answers they gave you, so you can really kind of breach of privacy and stuff, I guess, if you really wanted to, right? But you can actually capture a lot of really cool information from it, and grabbing that information is really good. You can say, hey, I had 10 zone chairs, 5 governors, whatever. So someone way in the back of the jump.
Can you arrange for interaction between the participants so that you might be able to do some role-playing exercises?
Well, you could elevate some of the attendees to panelists, and then they can now have some of the control that way. You can unmute them. You know, you might want to be careful with that, because you might be dealing with people though who you've never met, and sometimes in a classroom setting you might be able to get volunteers to role play something. It might be difficult, but you know, be something interesting to try. The whole idea of doing a webinar is what tactics and techniques do you do in a classroom can you tweak and adapt and change to suit in an online version, right? And so there are lots of those things you might be doing, role plays and so on, that you might be able to adapt and figure out into a webinar. One of the problems with that though is sometimes you have to be pretty quick on your feet too, because you only got an hour, right? So it might be hard. So. Yeah, there are little things we can do to engage.
On the webinars I've attended for LCI, the little part where you can raise your hand,
yeah,
it just makes it so personal.
It does.
When they call your name, oh, this is Berta from you. You know, it just, I don't know, it just adds a very personal touch.
And I think you're spot on in trying to keep your webinars personal, because it's really easy to be impersonal on a webinar, right? Because you're talking to a box, you're talking to people all over the place, you don't know who they are, you don't know what they look like, you don't know maybe their background or what they bring to the table in the discussions. So trying to make it as personal as possible, I think, gets you engaged and so on. And that's, I think, really important, is being helpful and saying, hey, nice to see you on again. You were on my webinar last month, and you know, how's it going in Florida, or whatever it might be, wherever you're from. So I think those things will be great, yeah.
This is my first time as far as participating in webinar. Is there security problems or anything that you got to do to your computer? Or?
There's a couple little files they download on the thing, but they're all secure connections. They're all pretty safe. There's nothing, you know, someone's going to steal all your banking information and stuff on the webinar. But you know, something else I would think, we'll talk about the first time. We do in our district, because we have some of our district officers who have never participated in online meetings and webinars and so on, we have kind of a practice session before we start our webinars each year, where we bring anybody who just wants to practice getting their computers set up or turning it on, and we kind of walk them through it. No real content other than this is how you use the control panel as a participant. So if you're going to do webinars, you might want to consider doing a how-to webinar, or how to participate in a webinar session for your participants in your district, so that they get a feel of it. Yeah.
This is an interesting engagement process. One of my lions very kindly sent me an email with a little file corruption on it. So we're tooling along with a Council of Governors meeting. We have 30 people going along. I'm sharing my screen. This still applies to webinars. And on the bottom corner, because I left Outlook up, I shrank it down, but Outlook was still active. A little pop-up came over and says, Viagra pills, 50 cents a dozen. Thing like that. It took me 15 minutes to bring the Council of Governors meeting back under control.
Were they all asking you where to get that Viagra?
Yeah, exactly. They wondered how long I had been subscribing and things like that. So it's important to turn Outlook off and all those surplus programs, because you don't know what's going to pop up on the side. And it was, even though we cleaned the screen,
it's still an active program.
The logo on the bottom wasn't there, but it shot in from the side saying, you've got an email that wants to know where you can get the pills for 50 cents a piece.
That's
a little disruptive, to say the least.
That's an excellent point. I did turn mine off. Although sometimes I do it on purpose to a person that I know is doing webinar, I'll send them an email during it just to see if it pops up.
I think this gentleman brought up a really great point. He's never been a participant on a webinar before. And if you have somebody in your club, you're all going to have somebody in your club who's going to say, I've never been involved in one of these before, wouldn't have any idea to do it. Why don't you come over to my house? and we can participate from my computer, and you can see how it works, and then you'll see how simple it is with just a link there that you just have to go up and click, and then when you want to enter a question, your name is there, and you highlight yourself, and you say, you type in what you want to do, or you write it out on a piece of paper, and I type it in for you if you can't, if you feel uncomfortable typing, because we're all going to have members that are uncomfortable with doing this, and after they do it the first time, they can go down to their library and do it, even if they don't have a computer at their home, as long as they can get hooked up.
Right.
Technically,
you don't have to overthink it, right? If you've got members in your club who are struggling, work with them, help them, support them to do those things. And you're very right. Once they get on once and participate in a webinar, they'll do 2, or they'll do 3, or they'll do 4, and then they'll be logging into LCI and doing all of LCI's webinars and participating there too, and gathering, and suddenly building friendships all around the world, which is a pretty neat thing. So.
Another thing I would suggest is to be careful of any other kind of notification you may have, such as if you have Facebook notifications, that's a big one, Pinterest notifications, and Instagram. All of those where it will all of a sudden pop up and show up on your screen.
Yes.
So you have to be careful of that as well.
Yeah, I always shut everything all off, right?
Shut everything off.
Put the muzzle on the dog, so the dog doesn't run in, because that happens regularly. I unplug my fax machine so it doesn't ring while I'm on the webinar, because someone will always fax you at exactly that time. Right? You get 1 fax in a month now, but it's always during the webinar. And doing a lot of those things, close the office door, make it all nice and quiet. My wife always brings my beers in first for me, so she's so all those things are great things, but notifications I think are huge. I've been on lots of webinars where all of a sudden stuff is flying left, right, and center, and you start hearing the presenter go, oh no, he's fast and furious, he's shutting down his presentation by accident. It just gets stupid.
I have a question. In the last few years, we've been pushing people to get more involved in technology.
Yeah.
Do you find some lions that are resistant to these types of ideas?
Not at all. We have 1.4 million lions in the world, and every one of them is so much into technology that it's not a problem.
Well, because before I came here, I had been on vacation, and I'm zone chair. And I needed to have a zone meeting. But because my zone is so spread out, Montana's a very, big state. And so I decided to have a conference call because there was information that I just needed to get to my president. And I had 100% attendance. But when I went back to my club the day before I left to come here, I was so criticized.
Change is a funny thing because it's continuous. And if you look at how our organization was 100 years ago, completely different than today. And I guarantee you, 100 years from now, our organization is going to be completely different than it is today. And it's going to be continuous. And, believe it or not, some of the biggest adopters of technology are the older generation. How many people in here are over the age of 65 that have an iPad or something like that? There's a whole lot of people using technology to stay connected with their friends, their families, their grandkids. All those things. So I think sometimes we underestimate some of those people who are anti-technology and so on. Because I think there's a lot more use of it out there, and we just have to convince them to do it. But given that, and although I'm a believer in technology and I think it's a great tool and a resource, it doesn't take away from stuff like this, which is really important. We could not do the forum online completely because there's value and there's so much learning that happens outside of a session in the evening, over dinner, over a beer at the lobby bar, and all that stuff. So all those things, you get so much learning that technology is just one way that we can teach and we can capture a group of people and train people effectively that way. But I give you a lot of credit for for trying something, doing a conference call to get your presidents and your secretaries together. This is no different than what conference calls used to be like, right? Except you have a screen now. You can see stuff. It's a little bit better, isn't it? We only have a few more minutes left, I think, so we have just one or two more questions.
I just wanted to piggyback on the thought that he gave, perhaps having places where people could gather to view the webinar, so that people who are unfamiliar with the technology would have the opportunity to have someone else be in charge of it.
I have one club in my district, and they have like a wine and cheese night whenever we do a district training. And their whole club comes over to the house, they crack open some wine, they have some cheese, they have a social aspect of it. They just plug their computer into the big screen TV in the living room, and they all gather around, they watch the webinar, they participate all as a group. So you're kind of getting training like this. You're still social, but you're still getting some online training. So I think there's great opportunities to do that.
On my cell phone, I have a personal hotspot. All of you have a personal hotspot. It uses data. The only thing that you have to do is go over, turn your personal hotspot on, bring your computer, your laptop computer to your Lions Club if your Lions Club doesn't have it, and you can have your webinar right there. You can have some of your Lions Club members participate right there with you without bringing a whole bunch of people into your house or trying to bring all this technology together, and you can just do it right over your laptop computer. It's not as big as a 17-inch or a 19-inch computer screen, but it works.
Yeah, it gets by, right? Exactly. And it's like using technology to do the best job we can of training and using it as one other way. So.
Last question.
Two more. We got one over the side.
This is just more of a comment. I'm all for technology. There's one thing with technology that really upsets me. You're sitting in a show and somebody's cell phone goes off. They pick it up and answer it. Same in this room here. People, we've got to come up with something that's polite. We did without them, and I'm sure an hour without it will help you out very much, and you're not going to lose a darn thing. And Bob Norman can get it.
My phone goes into meeting mode whenever I'm in a meeting, so it always shuts down when I'm active. So, we have one more over here. Okay, one more over here. Yeah.
On your slide presentation, it's available on through the Pokey.
Yes, it was uploaded. I noticed. I logged in today. I didn't see it on there. I don't know if they've put it on yet.
It's on.
Yeah,
The question I had to ask you is on the form where you send out the emails on the
yep.
You've got written down here reminder email.
Yes.
Send 1 hour and 1 day.
Yes.
Is that 25 hours or is that 1 hour before and
two emails? Two emails. We'll send one out a day before. One. The PowerPoint you'll see has screenshots of all those screens, so you'll actually be able to see the different settings and so forth. So anyway, I'd really like to thank you for your participation and your involvement. I'm just a phone call or an email away if you ever want to get in touch with me, if you have any questions about putting on your very first webinar. I want you to go back to all your multiples and districts and tell them to pony up for $1,000 and do something like GoToMeeting because I think there's real value in it. You can even practice with it and do like a 30-day trial where you get an option to do them so you can do a webinar without paying anything. So that's a great opportunity.
You had mentioned
Google, yeah.
Okay, and it's a free service.
Yeah, it's free. Don't quote me on the limits on how many people you have, but yeah.
But it's free.
And it's very similar. Like they're all pretty similar. Like the control panels are going to be a little bit different, but but they're all pretty similar. Some of them might need some ads on the bottom too. But depends on how.
I was just curious about because I've never heard of it.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you.
Perfect. Anyway, well, thank you. There's no need to fill out surveys because I've already completed them all for all of you. So there's absolutely no need for that. I've already dropped them off at the seminar's office. So I would like to hope that you enjoy the remainder of the forum. It's a great time having you here, and I'm so glad that you took the time to join us. I'll be at the lobby bar having happy hour in a few short minutes, so if they would like to join me for a beer, I'll be glad to have you by me. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. If you haven't shaken paws with me, please come up and do it. We're trying to keep the numbers and make sure you can get your information, okay? Thanks very much for being here. This was a wonderful session that we've had. Lots of questions. It's always good. Thank you.